My father-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "You can't bring him to the veterans event. He's just a stepkid." My husband added, almost like it wasn't worth arguing, "He wouldn't get it anyway." And I said nothing. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the words caught somewhere between my heart and my throat. I was angry. I was ashamed. And most of all, I was afraid that if I pushed back, I'd only make it worse for my son. But during the ceremony, in front of the entire town, my son stood up. He spoke words I'll never forget. Words that silenced the room and, for the first time, made even the hardest hearts pay attention. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to understand the people in this story and why this day mattered so much. My name is Elena Ward. I'm 37 years old, a mom first and foremost. For most of my life, it was just me and my son, Caleb. He's 15 now, kind, fiercely loyal, with a quiet strength that surprises even me sometimes. When Caleb was little, I used to tell him that courage isn't about being loud or fighting. It's about standing tall when it matters, about protecting the people you love, even when no one sees or understands it. He listened. I never imagined how deeply those words would take root. 2 years ago, after nearly a decade of raising Caleb on my own, I married Ryan Ward. I love Ryan. I truly do. He's a good man in many ways, steady, responsible, a veteran who served proudly overseas, but he carries certain ideas about family and about Caleb that we've never fully been able to bridge. Ryan has always treated Caleb politely, but politely isn't love. It isn't acceptance. It isn't a seat at the table, and Caleb knows the difference. Then there's my father-in-law, Gerald Ward, 68, a retired colonel with medals that fill an entire shadow box in his living room. He walks with the posture of a man who's lived his life by strict rules and expects everyone else to do the same. Gerald respects service. He respects bloodlines. He respects tradition. But when it comes to stepkids, well, there are things he doesn't say out loud, but they show in every glance, every withheld invitation. And this Veterans Day event, it's Gerald's pride and joy. He organizes it every year, personally. In our small town, it's the one day where veterans and their families are honored with ceremony and speeches. Flags line the streets, the high school band plays, everyone comes. When Ryan mentioned the event this year, Caleb's eyes lit up. "Do you think I could go?" he asked me quietly. "Of course you can," I said, because in my heart there was no question. Caleb has always looked up to Ryan, to Gerald, to the veterans in our family, even when they haven't returned that affection. He wanted to support them. He wanted to belong. So I asked Ryan. I said Caleb wanted to come. Ryan hesitated. Then he said, "I'll ask my dad." I should have known what was coming. A few days later, Gerald and Ryan were sitting in our kitchen when the conversation came up again. That's when Gerald said it. "You can't bring him to the veterans event. He's just a stepkid." And Ryan followed with, "He wouldn't get it anyway." I was standing there with a dish towel in my hand, feeling like the air had been punched out of my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. I looked at Ryan, then at Gerald. Neither man seemed to realize the cruelty of what they'd just said. Or maybe they did, and they simply didn't care. Later that evening, when I thought Caleb was out of earshot, I told Ryan quietly that I didn't agree. But before I could finish, I heard Caleb's voice from the hallway. "Mom, it's okay. I still want to go." "Are you sure?" I asked, my heart breaking. "Yeah, not for them. For you," he said. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to tell him, "No, stay home. We don't need their approval." But I also saw something in his eyes, a calm determination that reminded me exactly how much courage can live in a 15-year-old heart. So I said yes, and I let him go. I had no idea what would happen next, but I can tell you this. None of us were prepared for what Caleb would do once we got there, and what he said that day changed everything. The morning of the event arrived faster than I expected. I didn't sleep much the night before. My mind kept circling back to what Gerald and Ryan had said, and to Caleb's quiet determination. I kept questioning my decision to let him go. Part of me wanted to protect him from the rejection I knew he might face. But a bigger part of me knew I couldn't shield him forever. If he wanted to stand tall in that room, I wasn't going to be the one to stop him. Caleb came downstairs early, dressed neatly in a button-down shirt and khakis. He'd even polished his shoes the night before. I could tell he'd put thought into every detail. "You look very handsome," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks," he replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes searched mine, as if looking for reassurance. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone today," I told him. "Just be yourself. That's enough." "I know," he said. "I'm ready." Ryan came down last. He glanced at Caleb but didn't say much beyond a polite, "Morning." I could feel the tension humming beneath the surface. Gerald hadn't changed his position, and Ryan hadn't pushed back. I think deep down he was hoping we'd change our minds about bringing Caleb. We didn't. The drive to the community center was quiet. I kept one hand on Caleb's knee, giving it a gentle squeeze every now and then. He just stared out the window, watching the flags lining Main Street. The town really did turn out for Veterans Day. Kids with painted faces waved small flags. Older veterans walked with their spouses, wearing jackets covered in patches and pins. Families gathered, greeting each other warmly. It was a day meant to honor sacrifice and unity, but for us it felt complicated. When we arrived, Gerald was already near the entrance, greeting people. His uniform was pressed to perfection. The polished silver on his medals caught the morning sunlight. He looked every bit the proud, retired colonel. His eyes flicked over to us as we approached. When he saw Caleb, I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded curtly to Ryan, then to me. Not to Caleb. We found seats near the back of the hall. I didn't want to put Caleb under a spotlight, but I also didn't want to hide him. He sat beside me, shoulders squared, chin lifted. "You doing okay?" I whispered. "Yeah," he said. "I want to hear what they say." The room slowly filled. Veterans sat in the front rows, flanked by family members. Town officials took their places on stage. The air buzzed with conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. I could see Ryan glancing toward the front, toward his father. He looked uncomfortable, like a man torn between two loyalties, but he said nothing. I sat there, heart pounding, watching Caleb. I kept thinking about everything that had brought us to that moment. Raising Caleb on my own had been the hardest and best thing I'd ever done. His biological father had left when Caleb was just a baby. For years, it was just the two of us against the world. We built a life together, a small but strong one. When I met Ryan, I wanted so badly to believe we could blend our families, that love and time would bridge the gaps. I thought if I loved Ryan enough and he saw how wonderful Caleb was, the rest would follow. But families don't always come together the way we hope. Ryan respected Caleb, but he never saw him as his own. And Gerald saw him as an outsider, plain and simple. Still, Caleb never stopped trying, never stopped showing up. And on that day, sitting in that room filled with veterans and proud families, he was showing up again, not to prove a point, not for recognition, but because he believed in honoring service and because he wanted to stand beside me. That's what broke my heart the most. Even after hearing those words, "He's just a step-kid," he refused to shrink. The ceremony began. Gerald took the stage, his voice strong as he welcomed everyone. Speeches followed, stories of bravery, loss, and pride. The audience listened with reverence. Through it all, Caleb sat still, eyes fixed forward, taking it all in. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but I knew this wasn't easy. Then Gerald announced an open invitation. Anyone who wished to share a few words about service or family sacrifice was welcome to do so. The room quieted. I glanced at Caleb, ready to lean over and tell him he didn't have to say a word. But before I could speak, he stood, my heart caught in my throat. I wasn't prepared for what he was about to say. None of us were. When Caleb stood, the room seemed to hold its breath. I froze for a split second, unsure if I should pull him back down or let him speak. My instincts as a mother screamed both at once, but his back was straight, his chin lifted. There was no hesitation in his movement. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside me. I could see his jaw tighten, a flicker of something in his eyes, frustration, maybe fear of what Caleb might say. And Gerald's gaze locked onto Caleb the moment he rose. His expression was unreadable, but his lips pressed into a thin line. The MC handed Caleb a small microphone. He took it with steady hands. "My name is Caleb Ward," he began, voice clear but soft. "I'm not a veteran. I'm not in the military. I'm just 15. You could hear the faint rustle of people shifting in their seats. I knew exactly what many were thinking. Who was this kid, and why was he standing up here? But then Caleb spoke again, and every ear tuned in. "I know I'm not what you'd expect to see standing here today. I'm not someone with medals or stories from the battlefield, but I do know something about service." My throat tightened. I gripped the edge of my seat. "You see," Caleb continued, "my mom raised me by herself for a long time, and when she married my stepdad, I hoped I'd be part of this family, not just in name, but in heart." Now you could feel the tension ripple through the room. Ryan stared at the floor. Gerald's eyes narrowed slightly. "When I heard this event was happening, I wanted to come because I admire what veterans do. I admire what they sacrifice, and I wanted to be here to support my family, even if some people think I don't belong." A few gasps sounded from the audience. People were listening now, really listening. "But my mom taught me something important," Caleb said. "She told me that service isn't always about wearing a uniform. Sometimes it's about protecting the people you love, standing up when it's hard, even when you feel alone." My vision blurred with tears. I didn't dare wipe them away. I didn't want to miss a second of what he was saying. "So today, I'm here because I want to honor that kind of service too," Caleb said, voice steady. "And if that's not enough to be welcome here, then at least I know I showed up. For my mom." Silence. For a long, heavy moment, the room was utterly silent. Then from somewhere near the front, a single veteran began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, another joined in, and then another. Before I knew it, a wave of applause filled the room. I glanced at Ryan. His face was pale, eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. I looked toward Gerald. His arms were crossed, expression stern. But then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded once. Just once. Caleb handed back the microphone and returned to his seat beside me. "I hope that was okay," he whispered. I could barely find my voice. "It was perfect," I whispered back. But the moment wasn't over yet. As the applause faded, Gerald took the stage once more to close the ceremony. He glanced down at his notes, then looked up. "Before we finish," he said gruffly, "I want to say something. Service comes in many forms. Not all of them wear a uniform. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought quietly, at home. That young man reminded us of that today." I felt Caleb shift beside me, startled. "Thank you, Caleb," Gerald said, meeting his eyes. I could hardly breathe. Ryan turned to me, his voice low. "I didn't expect that," he said. "Neither did I replied, my heart full to the brim." The ceremony ended, but the real change had only just begun. That single act of courage from my son, a 15-year-old who had every reason to feel small in that room, had done what I couldn't. It had forced everyone, including Gerald and Ryan, to see him, really see him. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Family isn't built on blood or approval or permission. It's built on love, loyalty, and the quiet courage to stand up when it matters most. After the applause faded and Gerald's final words hung in the air, I sat frozen in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Caleb had done something I hadn't had the courage to do. He had stood in front of an entire room of strangers, many of whom had already decided he didn't belong there, and spoken from his heart. And in doing so, he'd changed something. Not just in the room, in me. As people stood and began filing toward the exits, I turned to him. "I am so proud of you," I whispered, my voice trembling. He gave me a small smile, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was still processing it too. "Do you think I upset them?" he asked softly. "It doesn't matter," I said. "You spoke your truth. That's what matters." But inside, part of me wondered, how would Gerald react? Would this cause more division between us? Between Ryan and me? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing. From that moment on, I couldn't stay silent anymore. That was my turning point. I had spent too long trying to keep the peace, trying to smooth over tensions for the sake of a fragile family dynamic. I had let comments slide, allowed space where there should have been love. Watching my son speak so bravely made me realize that I had to do better, not just for him, but for myself. Ryan approached us a few minutes later, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "That was something," he said, looking at Caleb. "You should be proud of him," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "I am," Ryan replied, though his tone was hesitant. I wanted to push him, to demand more, but I stopped myself. Not here, not now. As we made our way toward the doors, a few veterans stopped Caleb to shake his hand. One older man with a Navy cap patted him on the shoulder and said, "That took guts, son." Caleb smiled politely, but I could tell he was growing overwhelmed by the attention. When we reached the parking lot, I knelt beside him. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired." "You were incredible," I said, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "You have no idea how many people you reached today." "I didn't do it for them," he said quietly. "I did it for you." I felt my eyes fill again. "I know," I said, "and that means everything." As we stood, I caught sight of Gerald approaching. My heart leapt into my throat. He stopped in front of us, towering over Caleb, his expression stern. For a moment, none of us spoke. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Gerald looked down at Caleb and said, "That took courage. Not many grown men could have done what you just did." Caleb looked up at him, uncertain. "Thank you, sir," he said politely. Gerald gave a small nod, then turned to me. "You've raised a good boy," he said simply. Then he walked away. I stood there in stunned silence. That was more acknowledgement than Gerald had given in 2 years of our marriage. As we got into the car, Ryan finally spoke. "I didn't think he'd actually stand up and talk," he said, glancing at Caleb through the rearview mirror. "He had more reason to than anyone else," I replied. Ryan didn't argue. He seemed to be lost in thought. The drive home was quiet, each of us wrapped in our own reflections. But something had shifted. I felt it in the way Ryan glanced at Caleb, in the way Gerald had spoken, in the way Caleb sat a little straighter, a little prouder, in the back seat, and in myself. That day, watching my son show such strength, I realized that I could no longer be the quiet peacekeeper. I had to be the kind of mother who spoke up, who stood beside her son no matter the cost. That was the decision I made on the ride home. From that day forward, I would not stay silent in the face of dismissiveness or exclusion. Not from Ryan, not from Gerald, not from anyone. If Caleb could find the courage to stand up in that room, then I could find the courage to stand beside him, out loud and without apology. That was the turning point. For all of us. And none of us would ever be the same again. When we got home after the event, the house felt strangely quiet. Caleb went up to his room without saying much. I knew he was probably exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. Standing in front of that room, speaking the way he had, took more courage and strength than most adults could have mustered. I wanted to go to him right away, but I also wanted to give him a moment to breathe. Ryan sat at the kitchen table, staring down at his folded hands. He hadn't said much on the drive home, and the silence between us had stretched longer than I could stand. Finally, I sat across from him. "You know he did something really brave today," I said softly. Ryan looked up, his expression guarded. "Yeah," he said, "he did. I hope you really heard what he said." Ryan let out a slow breath. "I did, more than I expected to." It wasn't a full admission, but it was a start. "He's not trying to replace anyone," I continued. "He just wants to be accepted. He wants to be seen." Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "I know, and maybe I've made that harder than it needed to be." That was more honesty than I'd heard from him in a long time. Before I could reply, the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. Gerald. I hesitated. "It's your dad," I said, holding up the phone. Ryan nodded. "Answer it!" I took a deep breath and picked up. "Hello?" "Elena," Gerald's deep voice came through, steady as ever. I wanted to call before too much time passed. "I'm listening," I said, heart racing. "I meant what I said to your boy today. Took me by surprise, I won't lie, but that kind of courage deserves respect." I was silent for a beat. "Thank you," I finally said. "That means more than you know." "I've been stubborn," he admitted. "Set in my ways. But maybe it's time I look at things a little differently." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Gerald Ward admitting he might need to change? It felt like the earth had shifted beneath my feet. I hope so, I said quietly, because Caleb deserves better. He's earned it, Gerald replied. You tell him that. I will, I promised. After I hung up, I sat back down at the table, my heart still racing. What did he say? Ryan asked. He said Caleb earned his respect, I replied. Ryan exhaled a long, slow breath. Good, he should have it. Later that evening, I went upstairs and knocked softly on Caleb's door. Come in, he called. I found him sitting cross-legged on his bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I entered. Hey, sweetheart, I said, sitting beside him. I wanted to tell you something. What? He asked, eyes curious. Your grandpa called. He said you earned his respect today. Caleb blinked, surprised. Really? Really, I said. And your stepdad, he's proud of you, too. He told me. Caleb looked down, fiddling with the edge of his blanket. I didn't do it for that, he said quietly. I just wanted them to see you, to see us. Tears pricked at my eyes again. I know, and they did. You changed something today, Caleb, more than I ever thought possible. He looked up at me, eyes shining. Are you proud of me? More than you'll ever know, I said, pulling him into a tight hug. You were the bravest person in that room. We sat like that for a while, the weight of the day finally starting to settle. In that moment, I realized something profound. It hadn't been the speeches or the medals or the applause that mattered most that day. It was the simple truth spoken by a 15-year-old boy with no uniform, no rank, and no need for anyone's approval. He had stood up, not for recognition, but for love. And in doing so, he had reminded all of us, me, Ryan, Gerald, and everyone in that room, what real service looks like. Not measured by ribbons or titles, but by the willingness to protect and honor the people we love. That was the moment everything changed, and I would carry it in my heart forever. In the days that followed the Veterans event, something shifted in our home. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. There were no grand apologies or tearful reconciliations, but there was a quiet change, and sometimes those are the ones that matter most. The morning after the ceremony, Caleb came downstairs a little earlier than usual. He looked rested but cautious, as if unsure what to expect now. Ryan was already in the kitchen, sipping his coffee. For a moment, I held my breath, watching them both. Then Ryan spoke. Morning, Caleb, he said, his voice steady. You want some eggs? I'm making extra. It was a small thing, but after years of politeness without real warmth, it meant the world. Caleb glanced at me, surprised, then nodded. Sure, thanks. That simple exchange told me everything I needed to know. Caleb's words at the ceremony had cracked something open, not just in the room that day, but in Ryan's heart, too. Later that week, Gerald called again. This time, he asked to speak with Caleb directly. When I handed Caleb the phone, he looked unsure. It's your grandpa, I said softly. He wants to talk to you. Caleb took the phone, holding it carefully. Hello? He said. I couldn't hear Gerald's words, but I watched Caleb's face as he listened, first surprised, then thoughtful. Thank you, sir, he said finally. That means a lot. When he hung up, I asked what Gerald had said. He told me I showed a lot of courage, Caleb replied, and he said he hopes I'll sit with him next year. Tears welled in my eyes again, not because I cared about seating arrangements, but because it meant that for the first time, Gerald was acknowledging Caleb as part of the family, not just my son, our family. Over the next few weeks, things continued to change, slowly but surely. Ryan started inviting Caleb to help with projects around the house. They began to find small ways to connect, fixing the porch railing, working on the old family car in the garage. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still old patterns that took time to fade. But there was effort, and where there is effort, there is hope. One Saturday afternoon, as Caleb and I were folding laundry, he looked up and said, Mom, do you think it really changed anything? I smiled. Yes, sweetheart, more than you can imagine. I didn't think they'd listen, he said. Sometimes the right words, spoken from the heart, reach people in ways you can't predict. I told him, that's what you did. You reminded them what really matters. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed, about how we often think courage belongs only to soldiers, to people with medals and titles. But courage can also live in quiet moments. It can live in a 15-year-old boy who refuses to let the words "step kid" define him. It can live in the mother who chooses finally to stop smoothing things over and start speaking up. It can live in the slow, sometimes painful effort of building a bridge where there wasn't one before. For me, the biggest lesson that day was this: family isn't about blood or tradition. It's about love, loyalty, and the willingness to stand beside the people who matter most, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Caleb taught me that, and in doing so, he taught his stepfather. He even taught his grandfather. And maybe, just maybe, he taught a room full of people who needed to hear it. A year later, when Veterans Day came around again, Gerald called us personally. "Bring the boy," he said. "I've got a seat saved for him." When we arrived, Caleb didn't sit in the back. He sat up front beside Gerald. And when the time came for people to speak, Gerald introduced Caleb himself. "This young man reminded us last year that service comes in many forms," Gerald said proudly. "I'm honored to have him here today." I sat in the audience, tears streaming down my face. Not because everything was perfect now, but because we were building something stronger together. And it all started with one boy's courage to stand up when it mattered most. A moment I will never forget, and a lesson I will carry with me always. That day taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the people we think don't belong are the ones with the most important lessons to teach us. My son didn't need anyone's permission to stand tall. He showed us all what true service and loyalty look like. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family or what courage really means, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. I'd love to know your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me how this story resonated with you. And if you enjoy stories like this, about real people, real moments, and life lessons, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the quietest voices can sometimes speak the loudest truths.